Thank you for joining us at the ever-improving No Soundbites Allowed podcast. My name is Michael Vasquez. We thank you for joining us in this adventure of describing the politics that go on in our nation on a personal and local level as often as possible, giving you, the audience, more than just 30 seconds to understand what's going on in our nation. We look forward to joining you as we go. Just sit back, enjoy the ride. Please remember, if you like the episodes, like it, share it, let other people know, and if you can, please donate, even if it's $2, even if it's $5, because it all makes a difference. We thank you, and here we go. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. That's right, this is Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier, your favorite host on the No Soundbites Allowed podcast, which I'm always happy to bring to you because you make the difference. You are the reason why I do this every single time, and I thank you for that and being around. Nothing's better than my audience, and I love you all. And the reason why I'm on today, I did a Facebook Live podcast the other day, and I was taking, it was a simulcast of this podcast, and I had a lot of people who watched it, well over 65 people were involved, and I thought, it may be interesting, and it was brought up by a couple people, why not do a live show on Facebook Live, which I am on right now, and take questions from people on Facebook about whatever it is they may have a question about and answer it for people. And that's what I want to do, have some interaction there and let people just tell me directly, what do you think? What's going on? So I'm going to do that for this episode. I'm not sure exactly how long it'll be, but I'll try and make it as interesting as I can for people. And hopefully, whether you're listening to the podcast or you're seeing it live on Facebook, and anyone on Facebook, please let people know and share it around. I'm going to try and do the best I can. And this is happening on May 5th at 12:09. We're starting to tape, and we'll see how long it goes and how well it goes. Okay? So with that said, let me first start off with a little bit of other news that I wanted to go over. And that is, first of all, I had a Caswin Sinclair came up, and he made a very interesting observation. He's a friend of mine. I've known him for, decades. And yes, that gives away my age a little bit. And Caswin wanted to correct me a little bit or ask me for clarification on Kanye West and what's going on with that. His observation was that Kanye, first thing is that the death threat he received was not because of his comments in support of President Trump, and was not related to politics, which that isn't what's being reported in the news at this time. And since I don't follow rappers and I could care less about them actually, and I don't really value entertainers in terms of politics, I don't know. What I can see is that Kanye West came out. He mentioned he supports our president. He received a horrible backlash from the entire rapping community and entertainment and Democrats and the media for his outrage of actually making an independent choice. And then we had his further comments, which were taken somewhat out of context, about slavery for 400 years, which, and let me explain a little bit about that. As I understand what he said in full context, Kanye was talking about the fact that, yes, slavery was around for about 250 years, given. And there was another 100 years of Jim Crow. Absolutely. And then what after that? For the last 50, 60, 70 years now, we have reached a phase where, yes, racism still exists, but opportunity exists like never before. We have more opportunity now. We have more equality now than we've ever had before. And yet, many people persist in essentially a slave mentality based on economics and politics, where they're beholden to a political party, the Democratic Party. And if you speak out against them, if you go off that reservation or off that plantation and speak out against Democratic candidates or Democratic liberal policies, you're savaged, especially as an entertainer or someone, a celebrity. It's incredible. I mean, we see Kanye being called a house N or an Uncle Tom. People are boycotting him. And while these things are all fine, I mean, it's First Amendment, you can do these things. We should notice that this is a message that if you go off reservation, like Stacey Dash, like Bill Cosby, which caused him to have all of his other problems, as I addressed in a different podcast, and now Kanye and so many others, you receive a backlash that just doesn't exist for any other group. I mean, think of anybody who's white, who's Asian, who's Indian, you name the ethnic group, whether it's Jews or Muslims, you name a group that says something independently in their thoughts, and all of a sudden, I'll bring them on the camera. Sorry, I'm also looking at Facebook Live, and I'm looking for questions and how people are responding. When I look at this and I say, hey, what other group has had such a backlash for just simply saying, I support or I don't support X candidate? You just don't see that. I mean, the comments of Matt Damon against President Obama didn't end his career. The comments of, what's her name, Roseanne Barr, when she supported President Trump, didn't end her career. We're not seeing that same kind of backlash. Even with the Dixie Chicks going against President Bush, you didn't see the same kind of vitriol that we're seeing now, and career-ending vitriol at that. Given the Dixie Chicks may not be as popular as they ever were, but guess what? They haven't been savaged and completely ostracized. Not like this. I mean, we have Kanye getting death threats and people cheering and applauding that. It says something. That is a mentality that I believe reflects a slave mentality that says that you can only have, and think about it, the blacks in America are the only group that is expected and demanded to be one political party only. And that's within the community and outside of it. So while my friend Caswin Sinclair brought up a very interesting point in saying that, this may not be related, the death threats with the Crips may not be related to it, I have to believe the reason why it's getting so much attention is because it's part of that backlash against him making a comment that doesn't go along with the political mindset or the expectations of the media and politics in general. So I did want to address that and answer his question about this and where I get that. And in terms of the 400 years of slavery, which I started off with, I also want to address the fact that I believe it's that mindset. When he's speaking about 400 years of slavery, we're talking about my understanding of it is what really should be the key part is this mentality that says we can't have any other party because we're black. So we have to be liberals. We have to be progressives. We have to be Democrats. And I don't see anyone, anytime you have any group that is being isolated and defined to one particular mindset, regardless of what their individual values or views may be, that is troubling and that is dangerous. I don't care what the group is or what the value system is. If you say you are X and you can only be X because you're a man, a woman, gay, black, white, Asian, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever it is, if you say that you can only be this because you're that, that's a problem. That is an extreme problem, and I have a problem with that. And I think it's dangerous for our society. So I did want to address that. And as soon as I start getting some questions from the people on Facebook, I'm going to be going further. I've never used this thing before, so I'm not sure how the Facebook Live works. I'm waiting for people to give me some questions there, and I'll probably jump on as well. But I also wanted to address something else, because a lot of people are starting to give a little backlash against President Trump and Republicans in reference to the 3.9% unemployment rate. So something that also was a question I had received yesterday. And I believe that may have been by Caswin and also a Matt Cornwell, a local singer. And they asked, 3.9%, I can't believe that. That can't be right. How could it possibly be true? Matter of fact, I was told, President Trump's only been in office for roughly 18 months now. How could he possibly have gotten the unemployment rate down to 3.9%? Because it's not enough time. Well, that's not exactly true. It is true that whenever a president, we say a transition from one president to the next, there is a lag time from one policy to the next. And that's true. And that time frame is approximately 6 months. So 6 months into the next term, roughly 6 to 9, you see one set of policies, economic policy, end and another one picks up. And that's part of the reason why when we heard President Obama, he blamed everything for 8 years on President Bush. That's incorrect. The true thing is to say that, yes, in the first 9 months of 2009, that was the end of the Bush economic policies. And so all of the economic data is in part reflecting that. And then from roughly September, and actually in Obama's case, roughly 6 months in June, we start to see it because he had already enacted the Obama stimulus back in February. So by the time we got to August, it was already very much the Obama policies taking effect in the nation and having a result. So when people say, well, Mike, how that doesn't seem right, but that's historically and consistently exactly what we see. And so that's one of the things. And we have seen that consistently so far for President Trump, there has been a net decrease in unemployment far more significant than under the Obama administration. This is at 3.9%. It is a result of President Trump and the Republican policies, including the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That's just a fact, which was enacted in November of 2017, and we're seeing it now. So that's the reality. And if you don't believe me, that's fine. You can go over to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is bls.gov. I will include the link, and you can look at the data yourself. Also, you can go to the St. Louis Fed, which is part of the Federal Reserve. And what they do, their job is to make sure that we have, hey, Matt, it's good to see you there. And what they do is they make sure that we have charts of everything. So you can see all of the data. Matt, I can see you. I know you had a question. I'm waiting for your question so I can answer it. So, bring it on. Bring it on.
I bring the matches, you bring the gasoline. Let's do it right, oh let's make a scene. There's no survivors, no survivors on this road we're on. Lead me astray, you little pussycat. Let's take this day and make it a disaster. Oh, I know what you're after. Happily ever after ain't a joke to you. You stilled the hand, won the knife. Yes, Lord, will you please spare this life? He said no. There's no survivors on this road wrong. Bring the matches, you bring the gasoline. Let's do it right, Oh, let's make a scene. There's no survivors, no, no, no survivors on this road. There's no survivors, no, no, no survivors on this road we're on.
How you doing?
Apologize for my appearance, but I'm glad I'm good. I'm actually going a little long. I'm glad you're taking my question right now. It's actually something that we spoke about briefly a day or so ago. I listened to your live yesterday, and you spoke about the economic growth that you've seen since President Trump has been in office, such as unemployment rates.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, don't things like that tend to be kind of a runover from the policies of the previous
administration? Yeah, and I'm glad you're bringing that up because I was just actually talking about that, and I want to talk about it a little bit more. Yes, you're right. There is a carryover from one administration to the next. And in fact, what happened is, and that's usually historically 6 to 9 months. 6 to 9 months for any president switching to the new president, that economic policy. So you saw that in 2009 with President Bush going to President Obama. And so that part of that downturn that we saw there is definitely President Bush. And when Obama said, it's not my fault for the first year, that's stretching it, first 6 to 9 months. Yes, he had a fair statement there. And we saw the same thing here with going from President Obama to President Trump. But the difference, there's two big differences here. President Obama, in February of 2009, started his Obama stimulus. And so that takes about 6 months to take effect. So by August, roughly August, we see that is Obama's start of his economic policy. And the downturn and the severity of the downturn was his. He owned it. He blamed it on Bush for 8 years, which is ridiculous. But realistically, you want to count his economic policy? You start in August of 2009. And I was just mentioning to people, you can go to BLS.org. That's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you'll see the data there. Or you can go to what's called FRED. The St. Louis Federal Reserve has charts of all economic data going back to about 1948. And you can see the charts, which I'm actually looking up as I speak with you. And that will show you how bad it is. One of the things that I like to look at, because someone said to me, well, Mike, how well can we actually say the 3.9% unemployment rate currently? Is that really because of President Trump and the Republicans, or is that because of President Obama? And the answer is, at this point, no, it's President Trump. And there's actually data on this. There's charts on it. And in fact, when he came in, going by, again, that 6 to 9 month period, you're looking at about 4.8% unemployment when the economic policies of President Trump took over, and we're now at 3.9. And that's a massive drop, faster than anything Obama ever saw, and faster than most presidents. It's huge. Now, that also... Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, there was actually an article in Forbes about this as well, saying that, well, the 3.9% isn't real. And they're right. Part of it isn't real. It partially is true that it's unreal because the biggest thing that actually brought down, and here's the thing that people don't know about unemployment. It's not a real number. It's a made-up number because it doesn't include certain things. Like the fact that when President Obama took over, 84 million people did not count. They didn't work. They weren't part of the job force, but they just didn't count. And that number actually increased.
That aspect of how, it's the same thing as, I do music. It's the same thing as how, view counts are inflated or follower counts are inflated. So I definitely understand that depending on the source that you're coming from, there's a slight skew to the numbers, or a slight bias. I definitely understand that.
Oh, there's a massive bias. But here's the thing. All the change for President Obama, the decrease, we actually added about 12, maybe 13 million people who were not counted as part of unemployed, even though they didn't work. 13 million. Under President Obama, we had approximately 14 million people, 14 million new jobs created. 13 million people weren't counted. You know what that means? He had a net increase of 1 million jobs. That's huge. Now, so far for Trump, we had an increase of about 1 million people that are not counted. But yet, our unemployment rate's gone down. But we've also added a huge number of jobs. It's somewhere in the realm of about 1.2 million. So, again, the numbers aren't exact, but we are having job growth far more than we saw under Obama, which realistically, if you include this not counted number, he was basically flat throughout the entire time he was in office. He really didn't help the economy. That's just the numbers.
Well, if you can, definitely send me links on any of that information so that I can do my own fact checking. It's something I like to do.
Absolutely.
Anybody who's watching this, I see a lot of my peers that are tuning in.
Hi, Sophia. Hi, Tim.
About this type of stuff where you have questions or you don't understand things about your local or federal politics, I highly encourage you to get involved, have these conversations, especially if it's a separate point than you, because we have to get the other. So it's occur.
Oops.
But I wanted to say thank you for taking my question. Get around a little while and have another on North South Korea winning a Nobel Prize. That's an interesting, bit of news I've seen recently. So.
Oh, well, the Nobel is also a very interesting thing. And thank you, by the way, for dropping in and giving us some of your questions. And I'm looking forward to everyone else's questions. Let me address the North Korea. A lot of people are very confused about that. I've heard a lot of people say, well, it has nothing to do with President Trump. And again, we have a disconnect of what's the reality versus what certain political groups would like to make people believe. The fact is that regardless of whether I believe this or not, South Korea believes that President Trump is the reason why they had peace talks. North Korea believes that President Trump is the reason why we're having the peace talks. And we wouldn't be at the table at this time if we didn't do it. And this goes back, and I'm going to blame President Bush, President Clinton, the other Bush, even Reagan, blame them all. They went through a process of appeasement. Same thing that we saw just before World War II. We appeased them. We gave them food. We gave them money, so that they would stay in the 65 years of ceasefire that we had. And that resulted in absolutely nothing positive. North Korea got nuclear weapons, and they've been trying to figure out a way to get that to be able to hit America. It's not a positive. And so that appeasement did nothing but keep things in that stalemate. We finally went through a new process. For the first time, we had a president that didn't just use appeasement, but actually challenged North Korea and did so strongly. And the result is we're at the peace talk tables. Now, whether that's successful or not, I don't know. But I can tell you that we finally did something different, and that has had a result that's positive. And as much as certain political entities would like to say, well, it's not his credit, it is absolutely his credit, because nothing else moved us towards this. Nothing else.
I suppose for better or for worse, it is his credit, and I can definitely find common ground with you on the fact that the new change in tactics is obviously pushing them to the peace table, in my opinion. But again, it's what I commented under the comment that Emeka had made about I took this is mine. To me, it's kind of like when your crazy you thanking your crazy ex-girlfriend for thank you for being so unpredictable and wild that I'm now in this new relationship. If it works, it works. That's where I guess and my mindset comes from is it's like, okay, yeah, he did it, but it's only because he's so out of his mind that these guys were terrified of what he would do if had they not obliged.
Well, yes, I understand the question of, or the thought that, he's such a cowboy, President Trump, that he pushed forward the idea of North Korea going and having peace talks. And guess what? That's also kind of what we saw with Reagan. And we had some of the calmest international world politics under Reagan as we do right now. It's the fact that, remember, we are the strongest, the most free, and the most rich nation in the world. We're looked at as the police force of the world. Well, part of the reason why we can do this is because people are they have a respect and fear of us. And when they have a respect and fear of us, some of the more radical elements of the world behave. And is that partially because they don't know what we're going to do? Yes. Is it partially because if we did something, we'd do it really, really big? Yes. Is that bad? Not quite. The reason why you have police forces and militaries is in part because of the fear and respect that they command. So to say we kind of made North Korea afraid of us, and that's why they're doing it, that's part of what we're supposed to do. And it's effective.
Right. Yeah, no, truth be told, I don't disagree with that. I mean, in some respects, if we're to sit at the top of this totem pole of world powers and be the peacekeepers, I understand that there's moments where force needs to be used. I suppose I just appreciated Barack Obama's approach a little bit more, and in the sense of speaking softly, and carrying a big stick. I wish that President Trump maybe spoke a little more softly.
Yeah, I suppose he could speak more softly, but why should he? And more importantly, as our government is, we're not known for being quiet people. We're not supposed to be. Quiet doesn't, you know what? President Obama was very quiet. He was very, very genteel in his international politics. And we had how many conflicts and how many lives lost? How many problems escalated? In fact, we can see articles, and I can look it up if you want. There's several articles where even Democrats are saying we lost our recognition throughout the world. We were less respected under President Obama than before. Even though we had a war, we were in a war, and we have less respect under Obama than after.
I do think that a fine line has to be drawn between fear and respect, though. As far as where again, to go back to the music thing, branding is really important.
Yes.
And, I feel like that Donald Trump has been a detriment to our world brand, if you will. Maybe he's brought to light, what more of the general consensus among, Americans is, but I respected the world. I felt more worldly. It felt more open doors to the world under Barack Obama. It seems a little bit too crass, a little bit too unelegant, uncalculated,
Well, let me address that. And that's a great question. A lot of people have it. And I pose this with a couple of questions. One, a couple of facts. One, he is not the most crass or the least intelligent or the least liked president we've ever had. We've actually had several throughout our history. It's not brand new. In fact, up until after the Civil War, most nations actually didn't even pay attention to us. They ignored us completely. They thought we were just basically what we think of as South America, a Yahoo government. They could care less about us. So we've often had our government internationally not be respected. And for most of our history, in fact, it wasn't until during and after World War II that we really gained respect internationally. That's only about 90 years ago. It's not quite. But it's a relatively short period of time in our history. So that's one thing. Two, there's this belief, I think, and hey Kaz, hey Brian, there's this belief that our president should be liked. And that's absolutely ridiculous. I call that the American Idol effect. We think that because we have a vote, it's based on how well we like this person. And you know what? Well, President Obama was a rock star. President Clinton was a rock star. They were very well liked. Were they effective? That's an entirely different question. The job of the president isn't to be liked. And it doesn't matter if people like them or not. It's not American Idol where you like them and it doesn't really matter because that's all they're there for. No. What we're looking at in a president is, are you effective? Is the nation safer? Is the economy better? Are we able to achieve the goals of our democracy and our representative democracy better? That doesn't mean you have to be liked. In fact, to get these things done, you probably won't be liked because you're going to do things that people are not going to be happy with. You have to. You have to. Because if you're just doing things to be liked, you're never going to be effective. And we saw that. We saw that with President Obama. And we saw that with President Clinton. And to an extent, we saw a little bit of that with some of the Bushes as well, and even with Reagan. Being liked doesn't equate to being effective. But we have this mentality right now because of American Idol and our instantaneous culture that, well, you should be liked. Who cares? Liked isn't effective. They're not the same thing. Just like infamous isn't famous. We've lost that meaning as well.
Find them to be mutually exclusive.
Huh?
I don't find them to be mutually exclusive.
I'm not saying that they're mutually exclusive. I'm not saying that either.
I think it's important to say, though, that's all.
Okay. No. And fair point. And I should say, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. JFK was effective and was very well liked. So it doesn't have to be exclusive, but in general, it usually is. Because the job of the president is the one job where you can guarantee there is going to be a majority of people, almost always, worldwide and in the nation, that are going to be pissed off and not like what you have to do. But you need to do it anyway. It's just the nature of the job.
Definitely. Obviously, it's not a...
Oh, by the way, folks, if everyone else who's listening, you can ask questions. Matt did too, so you can ask questions and I'll answer those questions too. Especially you, Kaz. I was already addressing some of the things you brought up earlier. Hey, Esperanza. Go ahead, Matt.
I actually lost my train of thought, but let me hop off this live. Let you take some other questions. I gotta get back on this phone anyway. But again, thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate this.
Absolutely. Thank you for jumping on as well. All right. And I hope you're going to have a good day today.
I will try my best. Cheers to the beers of the years, my friend.
Cheers. All right, folks. I don't know how to turn off the Facebook live match thing. I don't know how to do any of this. I think he just jumped off, so that's all right. But again, anyone else who has a question, I know you're listening to this live and I'm answering questions as best as I can, I hope, to address all of the questions and issues that you may have out there, especially if it relates to politics. So ask away and I'll try and do my very, very best to answer them. So speaking about local and state level, let's talk a little bit about immigration. One of the issues that I know is a big hot button for a lot of people. And I have to believe, and I strongly believe, sanctuary cities, sanctuary states, worst thing we could possibly do. Horrible, horrible idea. Because it doesn't help anyone. At the end of the day, it's not a positive for our nation. It's not a positive for the people. So that's something I just want to mention there. And I know a lot of people disagree with that. And one of the biggest reasons why sanctuary cities are not a great idea, I'll start with a very simple and most basic one. We're a nation of laws. And if arbitrarily any state, any governor, any city, any group of people can arbitrarily just throw away a law, we're no longer a nation of laws. And if there's no other reason why immigration is, enforcement of immigration is important, that's one of them. So, and I don't know how anyone can dispute that. You want to change the law, that's fine. And we make new laws, that I agree with as well. But you can't just arbitrarily say, this law is good, that law isn't. You just can't do that. Oh, I have a question from Claudia. Hello, Claudia, again. And Claudia Miller says, I have seen recently that students for the Second Amendment are now speaking out. I think that trying to remove any amendment is a slippery slope. Okay, and that's a really good question. I thank you for that. And I think it's an important one. So let's address this. So everyone knows that there was the shooting in Parkland, Florida, and a lot of people had, and obviously the kids, 17 people were dead, were killed in that incident. And there were a group of kids who decided that they wanted to do two things. One, speak out and try and affect the Second Amendment in our nation. And they also wanted more government intervention. And I find it quite interesting because what they didn't understand is what is the consequence. And there's a big thing. Whenever you want to change an amendment, you want to increase, add a new law, what you're doing is actually taking away freedom. You're losing freedom every time because the government can only be able to do things if you aren't allowed to do things. Every time we add a new law, we take away that freedom. And it's a basic tenet of America. In fact, it's the 10th Amendment, that all power, unless literally written down, belongs with the people and not the government. And that's a fact. So until we actually make a law, you have a right to do something. And it is only until we write a law that the government has the power. So it's a negative reinforcement on the government. The government is limited to the laws that exist. The people have every right. That doesn't have to be recorded. The government doesn't give you your right. You already have it. We give the government a right to do whatever it wants to do, which includes the Second Amendment, which is a fundamental right. So we saw a lot of protests that came out, which were arranged by political organizations to get the kids out and across the country and to march out of schools. And during that, there were a lot of schools like it was KTSU out of Minnesota, where we saw a bunch of incidents where kids were protesting against the Second Amendment. They were for the Second Amendment, and they were punished for that. Several students were suspended, sent home, and otherwise penalized for saying their opinion, which didn't match the approved opinion of fighting against the Second Amendment or trying to limit it. And so, took a couple months, but there was a counter protest. Many people are not aware of that there was a protest in favor and supporting the Second Amendment, including in my local region in the Southern Tier, 2 schools that had a protest marching where students were coming and leaving school for 17 minutes to say, we support the Second Amendment, even though there was this horrible thing that happened. And guess what? You're seeing no news. It was not reported. Why isn't that reported across this nation? We saw lots of reports about people saying, hey, these are the kids saying they don't want the Second Amendment. What about the kids who do want it? What about those who were in favor of it? And that's a bias in the media, and that's a big deal. I think that's really wrong that we only see the media emphasizing a singular message. That's called propaganda. When the news media is picking a side and speaking about just one issue and saying that this is the only issue the people should know about, that's propaganda. Okay? If the media went out and said, hey, here are the protests, here are the excuse me, here are the protests, here are the counter protests, and this is just what happened, and also told people, hey, students came out and made a protest in support of the Second Amendment. They had a walkout in favor of that. Isn't that a great thing? What do you think about it? Come out and vote and talk to your politicians about it. That would be one thing. That's not what they did. They've buried the story that there were students who support the Second Amendment, to put out this message and this image on social media as well as the news that the only answer is to remove the Second Amendment. I disagree with that. I massively disagree with that because I think that's the wrong answer. It's not real. It's not effective. It doesn't help anyone because the Second Amendment isn't about hunting. It isn't about target shooting. It is absolutely about protecting ourselves from a government that has too much power. And we're getting that now. And I cannot believe that we have so convinced the youth of this nation that they are willing to give away their rights forever or delayed because of popularity. I mean, think about that. Imagine if someone said, you can't drive a car until you're 25 because someone else had a car accident and people died. But you will not have the right to drive a car until you're 25. Maybe, if we give you that right. That's crazy. Why? Because someone else did something? Guess what? There was people who have been, actually, there was about 4 to 5 times more people who've been killed by a baseball bat than a semi-automatic rifle, which, many in the left like to call an automatic weapon, which is wrong and just stupid because it's not what the definition of it is. But more people have died because of baseball bats. And I don't see anyone saying you can't have a baseball bat or that you can't use a baseball bat until you're 22. Why? Let's think about that. Driving while texting, another great example. No one says that you can't use your cell phone to text until you're 22. But texting while driving has killed more people than every mass shooting over the last 5 years. Actually, over the last 10 years. Easily. Bad young drivers have killed more people than all mass shootings in our nation combined. Just in 1 year. In 1 year, there have been more, there's about 50,000, 36 to 50,000 people who die because of driving. Whether it's young drivers and drunk drivers, all driving deaths put together, you'll see about 10 times as many than any other factor that you can put together. I mean, all mass shootings, whether with handguns, with rifles, with shotguns, which most people don't even know that there's different categories and that we're separated and the FBI tracks this. But if you were to put all of them together, you're looking at 3 to 5 times as many people dying because of just bad driving. That's huge. I mean, there is a big question here. What are we focusing on? Why are we focusing on the least of the problem? There are, on average, since the last 35 years, about 20 mass shooting incidents per year, with about 100 people dying per year out of those incidents. That is the average. It's consistent. It doesn't change. And it has been the same all the way through for the last 35 years. And while that's not a good thing, that's not our biggest issue because there's over 6,000 people who die in black on black violence. That's huge. 6,000 versus roughly 100 every year. And that's every year. That's huge. 50,000 people die because of driving, drunk driving and texting while driving. 50,000 people die because of that versus 100 every year. There's a big difference. That's huge. So that makes a really, really big question. So I thank you for the question, Claudia. I hope I addressed that properly for you. And I think it's important that we have to, before we try and change amendments, as people are saying right now, and try and take away permanently rights of the people, we really need to understand the consequences. Because at the end of the day, I have to wonder, what happens if you take away the ability of someone to have the right to defend themselves? What happens next? I'll give you the worst case scenario. Let's say that we lose the right to have firearms. Say we become like England, where you just can't have a semi-automatic rifle. You can't have a handgun. And people are left with knives. And let's say, and let's take the worst case scenario that Democrats are putting out there. And let's say that there's a Republican or there's a president who suddenly decides to be a cowboy and wants to take over the country. And they're going to use the military to do it. What will the average person in America do? They've taken away your guns. How do you protect yourself? What do you do? It's a big question. I mean, there's your worst case scenario, and that's what the law is built for. That's why we have that right to protect ourselves, because that worst case scenario has historically happened over and over and over again. Claudia has another question. I am also for the legalization of marijuana, but I am also for the small businesses being the one to take advantage of the opportunity that is given with this. I don't think that one large corporation, I'm trying to read your whole question here. One large corporation should be allowed to corner the market on these supplies used to grow marijuana, or should be allowed to GMO it either. This is an opportunity to have growth for small businesses. Okay. And Caswin has come in with a question. And by the way, it's hard for me to read the questions just because of the background, so bear with me. But Caswin Sinclair says, while does it have to be classified as black-on-black violence? White people kill white people, but it's not classified as white-on-white violence. Actually, Caswin, just as a quick answer to you right there, actually it is classified as white-on-white violence. It is. By the FBI, they do classify it as white-on-white violence. They do separate it by male violence, female violence, different victim classes. So the FBI does in fact classify all the different races, Hispanics as well, and also breaks it down by gender, male and female. So they do have that. Why have they done that classification? They've always had it. It's just a way to break down all the different groups that are committing crimes, because there are a bunch of people who ask about that and are interested in it. But let me also answer a question for Claudia. I don't agree with legalizing marijuana. A lot of people do. I don't. And that's a personal decision. Not everyone agrees with it. It's not the most popular one. I do believe that it's not a positive for our nation to be addicted and using drugs on a regular basis. It just sets a trend that's bad. That doesn't help us. Could it hurt us? Absolutely. Drug addiction of any form is a negative. And I don't care that people say it's innocuous. It's not that bad. There are worse things out there. Any form of drug addiction is bad. Look at China in the 1920s to 1950s, up until they took on, and I'm using them as an example because of their opioid problems, and how bad it was. Over 20% of their population were addicted to drugs. It's a problem that doesn't go away, and enabling that problem doesn't make it better. And we have a drug culture in our nation that we have cultivated and promoted, and that's not going to help us in the long run. And so legalizing marijuana isn't a positive. It seems nice and it seems fun, and yeah, it may give us some economic boost, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be a positive for us, because the culture isn't one where it's used medicinally. It's a culture of, it's recreational, it's an escape, it's the reasons why people go to drugs. Escapism, a high, a change. That isn't positive. There is no positive benefit, in my opinion. But yes, I do believe that if you're going to have it, there should be competition. It shouldn't be all large corporations. And in terms of the GMO, I don't know enough about that to speak about it. But Caswin also asks a couple of other questions. The media doesn't. Going back to his question about the separation, that when the FBI and their files, they classify they break down crimes by gender, they break it down by ethnicity, and so there's white on white crime, black on black crime, white versus black crime, black versus white crime. They break it down like that. And his question is, the media doesn't break it down with white versus white crime. Actually, that's implied, so they don't. But whether or not, if you're not seeing them say that, ask them. One of the best things is to ask the media, what are you talking about? I've challenged the media more than a few times. Anyone can. The data is there. The data is the data. So you can always challenge it. If you think someone is reporting it badly, tell them that. Make a public statement. They will respond, or at least they do with me every time I've made a public statement saying, you got it wrong. That those facts aren't there, or parts of the facts were excluded or obfuscated or badly worded and badly explained. And I've taken on the Observer Dispatch up in Utica. I've taken on the Press and Sun News down here in the Binghamton, Broome County area. So you can do that. And if there is a question, ask them. Because that's the only way. It's the only way they're going to be held accountable, because they have to be. And if you're not paying attention and you don't know, or you don't ask, no one else does either, quite often. And Casman goes on to say, I do agree with legalizing marijuana. Alcohol is worse, I believe you mean. And he's going to use the classic Amsterdam as an example. Fantastic. Yes, Amsterdam does have this. They have a very different culture. I don't think you would compare Amsterdam to America in very many ways. Let's see. Amsterdam leads the world in what? Amsterdam has created the innovations that have led the world to prosperity in what? Amsterdam is defending the world with what? When? Sure, Amsterdam has a culture that's very different than ours. Fantastic. That doesn't mean that they're right. It doesn't mean that their model works for us. It just doesn't. So you can say, Amsterdam's able to do it. Fantastic. Amsterdam has about, as many people as New York City? We have 327 million people. They have, 30 million? It's not the same thing. Scales of economies are very, very different. The mix of people is very, very different. Most of the people are indigenous people from Holland. Okay? Most of the people in Amsterdam, Holland. Most of the people in Holland, the Dutch, are Dutch. They're not dealing with the same kind of immigration that we have. We have people from every culture in the world, from every part of the world. That doesn't always integrate very well. And Amsterdam doesn't have to deal with that. Holland doesn't have to deal with that problem. It's not a Dutch issue. So you're talking about very many different factors that are affecting them, both in terms of scale of economy, the number of people being affected, the nature of the different cultures of people that are being affected, and how they've lived for a couple hundred years in that culture, as opposed to this relatively new culture that we have here. So it doesn't work. And I'm happy for them that they're able to have that balance based on a couple hundred years of just Dutch people dealing with just Dutch people. Fantastic. But I don't think, and I don't see them in that culture leading in anything. I don't think it's a positive example, because why should we take a step down to be more like them? We have a better system. And ultimately, I still agree with the fact that at the end of the day, in promoting a drug culture, whether it's alcohol or anything else, and I drink beer and I do smoke cigarettes, so I understand there are lots of addictions out there, but if we are dedicating our community, whether small or large, towards drugs, we inevitably see a negative backlash of that. That's just something that I always tend to find. Not everyone agrees with that, but that's okay. That's why we have a nation and we have representatives. And, if enough people think that we should legalize it, go out there and make a law. Let's go and have it voted on in Congress. I'm perfectly happy with that. I don't agree with it. I will oppose it personally. But you know what? I'm only one person. We have the power to vote. Let's get it in a referendum. Get it out there so that people can vote on it. Let's elect people to vote either way on it. Let's make it something where the people and our vote actually are the factor. And then we'll see. That's the best thing we can do to any question we have about government. Always. I see that Tom Ford has joined. And thank you, Tom, for jumping in and enjoying us here. I'm always happy to see people on. And, there's a bunch of buttons on this thing. I don't even know what they do. Oh, I can invite friends. That's cool. I did not know that. Okay. I didn't know I could do that. It's the, I don't use this Facebook Live thing, so I don't know what it is. But let me see. Is there anyone else? I know there's a bunch of people who are watching. So, Kaz has another question. By the way, Kazwin is one of my oldest friends, so I call him Kaz. Kazwin says, no one has ever OD'd from marijuana. You're right. I'm not aware of anyone ever overdosing on marijuana. I am aware of people having car accidents and killing people because they are under the influence of marijuana. I do know that people who are under the influence of marijuana, which is a psychotropic drug, which means that it alters your mind and the way that you think and see and perceive things. Many people have died because of consequences of being high. So, and is that a huge number? I don't know, because no one's really done an accurate study. We're starting to get that in Colorado, and we do know that in Colorado, since they started recording this, there has been a large number, a significant increase of over 100% in the number of people driving under the influence and having accidents. So, to say that no one's OD'd, that's not the only way that a drug can kill people or harm people. So, yeah, they're not going to have an overdose like they do with heroin. Fantastic. Doesn't mean that they're not causing deaths for themselves or others just because they can't think straight. Also, I see you mentioned the question, and this is a popular one, that is marijuana a gateway drug? And the answer to that is, for some people, yes, and for some people, no. We can't say that it isn't a gateway drug, but at the same time, you can't say that it absolutely is. And I think many people, and I know in my experience, growing up in the Bronx during the time of the crack epidemic and beforehand and after, that many people did transition from marijuana to crack and to cocaine and to heroin. And I've seen that in other parts of the country. When I lived in L.A., where heroin was an epidemic about 20, 30 years ago, and has again become one, that was also part of the transition for a lot of people. There are some people who are always going to be chasing a brand new high, and they will go from one drug to another drug and continue until they die, because that's the nature of drug addiction for some people. But for other people, absolutely not. They can take it or leave it. They can use one thing and never have to use another. Sure, that's absolutely true. But the question isn't really, is it a gateway drug? It's, what is our drug culture? The gateway is the drug culture. We emphasize that people should be on drugs and should be high. We have movies dedicated to being high and glorifying it. We have rappers and an entire industry that glorifies drug use, illegal drug use, and the violence that comes from that drug use, and the abuse of women and kids because of that drug use, the lack of education that comes from that drug use. The culture that surrounds the way we use drugs in this nation is absolutely horrendous. It is a negative. If you told me that we could change that and we have a much more positive outlook about the use and it being recreational and positive, fantastic. I'm all for that. That isn't the reality that we have today. The reality we have today is drug use is glorified because of the violence, the money, and the abuse that it allows. And and the fact that some people are chasing that as a new high doesn't help. But that's my thought on it. Another question from Claudia. Thank you. And Claudia says, people are already using marijuana, so why not legalize it? Gateway drug. Are cigarettes a gateway drug? It's, okay. Gateway drug. Are cigarettes a gateway drug? It's made to be addicting. Okay. That's a good question. And I thank you for asking it, Claudia. And let me address that. Yes, nicotine is addictive. Actually, nicotine is the most addictive drug known to man. Last that I had, there was a couple of studies on that. I think it affects the brain in about 6 seconds. It's the fastest, and heroin takes 11. So it is one of the most addictive drugs that are known to man. Okay. And is it a gateway to other drugs? Not that I'm aware of. Again, I would say probably for some people, not the majority, but for some people, sure. Because nicotine isn't a psychotropic drug in the same way that any other drug is. It doesn't change your mindset or your ability to think. It does change your physiology, which is why we have the addiction, and that's why there is a rush and a high that comes with it in terms of your heart rate being stimulated and certain endorphins being kicked off, but it doesn't change the way that you think or you function. And there's been lots of studies on that. We're talking about drugs like marijuana, cocaine, heroin. They change the way, not only your physiology, but your ability to think. There is a big difference. But could I say that absolutely no one has ever gone from smoking cigarettes to smoking marijuana to smoking crack? I can't. Is it a gateway for some people? Probably. Is it the same kind of problem? Not really. Not really at all. Because the culture around smoking is not built around violence and just destroying people's lives. It's just not. So it's not the same thing. In addition, why, again, to legalize marijuana, I again go, if that's something that people believe in, go elect people, representatives, to go and make a law and to ask them to legalize it. I don't. I vote for and I elect people or try to elect people who will fight against that. That's my view. I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't go out there and try and tell someone to do it. I'm going to tell you that if you believe it, ask someone to do it. And then they will. And if you get it, and if it becomes law, I'll live with the law. Because that's our society. And that's what we're supposed to do. Is alcohol a problem? Yes. Is there a problem? Although you do not have, again, the culture and the cultural mindset that says that we're going to use alcohol to kill people. You don't. Okay. It's not the same. Look at any rap video you want. And I use that because it is the most glorified medium that we see, where people go out there and they are literally glorifying the abuse of women, the breaking of laws, of violence, black on black and anyone else against anyone else. It's glorification of violence. You don't see that. I have yet to see a Budweiser commercial where they are advising people to abuse a woman, break the law, and kill somebody. You don't see that. I do see that with rap music. I do see that with drug culture. So, is alcohol a problem? Sure. Is it a culture that promotes violence and the degradation of society? No. So for me, is there a difference? Absolutely. Not everyone will agree with that, but that's the difference for me. Now, I do see, and by the way, hey, Mike, I see you, Mike Woodward is watching and he's on. I see that we have Claudia here, and we're just over an hour, so I'm going to be taking a quick break, also because my battery's dying. But we'll keep going. Claudia goes on to say, we can, give me a second, we can also throw sugar under the bus. Oh, sugar. She's talking about sugar as a gateway drug. There is also many legal things that can be thrown under that particular bus. These things can also be changed change the way you think and feel. Okay. I think you're talking about sugar. I don't consider it to be a drug. It's a food. It's a product. It's very natural, as is marijuana. I understand. But I don't see it having, again, there is no psychotropic. It doesn't change your mindset. It doesn't change the way you think or the ability to think. Unless you're about 5 years old and then you're bouncing all off of walls. That's a different thing. But adults and anyone over 5, really, you don't have that effect. So, no, I wouldn't say that sugar is the same as marijuana or other drugs. You're right that opioids, the painkillers, which are, the opioid drugs, that they are Oxycontin, as an example, has brought about a lot of the problems with heroin. Absolutely. Could we better regulate those drugs? Sure. Could we innovate and find better drugs that don't do the same thing? Painkillers that don't have the same kind of addictive qualities? Absolutely. Is that a problem? I agree. And what are we doing? We're trying to regulate and change that and make it better. We're addressing the problem. We have to change that culture. We're changing that culture with pharmaceuticals and with doctors to make it better. So, yes, I agree. It is a problem that there are pharmaceuticals that create addictions, that change people's mindsets and ability to think and cause them to have other drugs. I think that is a problem, and we are addressing that problem, and that is a good thing. So, I'm all in favor of regulating that. So I agree with you there. Again, it's not mutually exclusive. This isn't, pick one and all the others are okay. I'm just saying there are several levels to this. Let me see here. Excuse me. No, I have not done any research on how sugar affects the brain. I have not, and I have no idea. So, again, I don't know everything. I know a lot of subjects. I know a lot of issues, but I don't know that. And most of the things I'm talking about right now, you can look up. There is detailed information about psychotropic drugs, about the effect of marijuana on the brain and the ability to have cognitive function, to think clearly. There's lots of information about, and right now very popularly, information about opioid drugs and how they connect to as a gateway to heroin. Please read this up. There are a lot of laws that are being enacted about this. Read up on this. These are important things because they affect a lot of rights and have applications to other things. So don't take it just for my word. I've done a lot of my own research. There are areas I miss, and I can't read everything. But I do invite people, please look at this, and you'll be able to see more about it. And I also want to say, I'm not saying that my opinion is the only opinion. I'm giving you the information that I have and the conclusions I'm making based on the information I have. It doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean that this is the only answer that there could ever be. As I said before, if you don't agree, go out, elect, have someone, go out there, support someone who's running for an elected office, back them up, get them elected, make sure they write the law that you want, and get that law put out for the rest of the nation, see if you can get it enacted for everyone. Because I'm not the final word, and we all have different opinions. And I'm not saying that my answer is the right answer. I do believe that based on my research, my experience, and my discussions with many, many politicians, that this is the most logical answer based on the information we have. But I don't have all the information, and I'm just a man. I can be wrong. Just because I've done research on it doesn't mean that all the research I found is definitive or correct. There's always that option, that there's always another answer. And I think we should always look for that. And I always think that it's not just one person, it's all of us together that makes the difference. Now, Michael Woodward came in and he has a comment as well. And by the way, folks, I'm going to give this about another 7 minutes. That'll give us an hour and 15 minutes. And then I'll stop because, one, I have another podcast that I'm going to be doing in about an hour for the SUNY Broome Republicans, as well as I need to give my voice a little bit of a break. But I'm enjoying this. This is fun. And so I have Michael Woodward has a question with marijuana in a legal situation, it can be grown under regulation. Illegally, marijuana, the chemicals makeup can be changed to make it a gateway to heavier drugs for the street dealer. And that is true. There is a big difference between medicinal marijuana, which has very, very big, strict restrictions on how it can be put together, and the chemical additives that we see that are added to illegal marijuana, like chronic, and I forget the other names of all of them. I don't smoke marijuana, so I don't care. But there are other additives, PCPs and cocaine, and just other formulas and chemicals that are added to it to give it different types of impact. And that's always been true. I mean, that's been true. I remember stories back in the 80s about PCP being laced in marijuana, which I do not advocate, because if you ever heard about those stories, those people wind up killing themselves and others very often. This is going back in the 70s. I'm a little older than most, so I don't advise that. But that is a concern. Again, it goes to the culture, the violence, the ever more high, and how some people can find it to be a gateway to other drugs. So that's an interesting point there, Mike, and thank you for making that. And whoops, here we go. Come on, silly machine. There we go. Wanted to give him a little thumbs up there. Caswin also, by the way, other people can also make comments here, so don't feel bad about that. We're just about to be ending. So, question from Caswin. A lot of those politicians are under the table marijuana smokers. Maybe they are. Okay. And I'm sure there probably are. They're people too. And some of them grew up in the same drug culture I'm talking about. Some of them find it to be a positive. Okay. And if you know for a fact, and if there's factual evidence that someone is being duplicitous, using marijuana at the same time fighting against it, call them out. Present that evidence. But I don't believe in allegations that are unfounded. If they are doing something that is deceptive or two-faced, call them out. I've done it with Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi often. He doesn't answer questions. He walks around the questions. I don't like that. I don't like that of any candidate. I said the same thing about Representative Richard Hanna when he was running for office, when he was in elected office, in fact, an incumbent. I don't like not having answers. I don't like people who are two-faced in politics. So if you're aware and have a fact about a politician who is against or even for marijuana and is a user or not a user, bring that out. Bring out that evidence and let people then be able to make a judgment and have them speak to the people about the honest truth of the situation. I believe in that very much so. Caswin also wants to go on that marijuana smokers are not violent. They are peace-loving. I didn't say that they weren't. I said drug culture is violent. And I didn't say marijuana. I'm not aware of people who are taking just marijuana. Again, marijuana that's been laced or modified has different impacts, and people do stupid things under that. But I'm not saying that marijuana smokers have gone out there and had riots. I'm not saying that. I am saying that marijuana dealers and people who control that are absolutely violent. I am saying that the culture that surrounds drugs in general in the United States is very, very violent. I will say that, the trade from Mexico is incredibly violent. The Colombian cartel, the various cartels in Mexico are absolutely violent. And to say that there's no connection of violence here in the United States as well is absolutely wrong. We have lots of people who die because of drugs and because of drug use. So you can't say that it's not accurate. Oops, I don't know what happened. I think I may have lost people. Or my phone just died. Well, it's about that time anyway. So what I will do is I will wrap this up for this podcast, and I'm going to thank everyone for being here. I will modify this slightly and break it up into 2 parts so that everyone can hear the show and see how it was, answering questions live from Facebook. And I think it was kind of fun, so I think I'll do it again next week. But until then, I want to thank everyone for having listened to the program and being here with No Soundbites Allowed. Please share it, and I'll let people know about it next time, and we'll try it again and make it bigger and better and more fun. Okay? I thank everybody, and I hope you're going to have a great day.